guys, I'm your host Tara A. Devlin, and welcome to this week's episode of Kowabana, true Japanese scary stories from around the internet. In case you didn't know, we have a merchandise store with all sorts of exclusive Japanese horror art that you can check out right now. I've just added a new design with more on the way, so do head over and check it out. You can find it at kowabana.myteespring.co. That's right, there's no M at the end of that. kowabana.myteespring.co. Grab yourself some cool merchandise and help support the show as well. This week we're looking at 3 popular stories dealing with Japanese spirits of all sorts. Are they kami? Are they regular old yurei? Are they something else entirely? Sometimes it's best not to find out. Our first story is about a man who often drives through the mountains to visit his aunt in Kyoto. On the way back one night, he finds himself being tailed by something that, well, shouldn't be. Find out what in Kameoka Ridge. This happened when my aunt used to live in Kyoto. She was my mother's older sister, and because she didn't have any children of her own, she always doted on me. I figured I had to return the favour, seeing as we were family, so I always diligently visited her. This was mostly whenever I had something to give her, if she was sick, or if I had to do something out that way anyway. Sometimes my mother also came along, but she worked and our times didn't always match. So the majority of the time, I went by myself. I lived in the north of Osaka, so to reach Kyoto, I had to take the highway after transferring through Kyoto, but this would also mean taking the long way around, and it would cost money. As such, I always passed over the Kameoka Mountains. Generally, I went to my aunt's house in the afternoon. We ate dinner together, and then I'd return home, meaning it was always dark when I passed back over the mountains. It was pitch black, and I rarely passed any other cars. I might see maybe 3 or 4 in a span of 30 minutes. It was reassuring to see cars going in the same direction, but at night, there were far more cars returning from Osaka than going the other way. Most of the time, there was just one car alone, driving and twisting along the roads. One time, as I was approaching the mountain road on my way home, I glanced in the rearview mirror and felt like I saw something behind the car. Concerned, I stopped and checked again. It looked like something white, and it moved like it was staggering. Was it a person? It was possible. There was a town just a short distance away with houses and a convenience store. But there was nothing but mountains up ahead, and the next village was definitely not within walking distance. The figure appeared to be a woman. Isn't it dangerous for a woman to be out here alone? I thought. But the way the figure staggered around creeped me out. But still, if it was an old person with dementia or someone mentally unwell, then things might turn out bad. After debating what to do, I decided to call the police and let them handle it. I might be mistaken, but just in case, I said when I called 110, and then I let them know the location. I started driving again, and when I glanced in the rearview mirror one more time, the figure was still walking. It was a little closer than before and seemed to be a young woman. On that note, she wasn't wearing a traditional white kimono or anything, nor was she wearing a dress like Sadako. She was in normal clothes. I hurried along, and before long, I could no longer see her. I didn't know if there was a police box or a stationed officer in the village, but I figured they couldn't be too busy and was optimistic that they would pick her up soon. I hurried through the darkness with my high beams on. There were few cars coming towards me from the opposite direction, so it was fine. I put a CD on, turned the music up loud and sang along. Before long, I reached the next village. Night comes early for those in the countryside, and most houses were dark. It was a tiny, tiny village, so I passed through it quickly and was back on the mountain road. I glanced in the rearview mirror again, and far in the distance, I saw something unbelievable. It was that woman. What the shit? It was the first time I'd ever felt so shocked. She was staggering just like before, and there was no way she could have caught up to me at that pace. I mean, at that very moment, she wasn't even getting any closer to the car. For the love of... Are you for real? I screamed aloud in my car. I put the pedal to the metal and got the hell out of there. I just wanted to get away from whatever or whoever that was. And so I drove, but I couldn't look in the rearview mirror anymore. After a while, I finally calmed down. Wait, did this mean I was going to die? That was how this went, right? I panicked, screwed up, and then crashed my car. No, calm down, calm down. I eased up off the accelerator. I lit a cigarette and opened the window. The rustling of the trees sounded just like human voices, so I stubbed the cigarette out in the ashtray and quickly closed the window again. Then, even though I should have let it be, I looked in the rearview mirror again. She was there, all the way behind me, but she was closer than before. The mountain road curved a lot, so the woman kept on appearing and disappearing behind me. There were periods where I didn't see her for quite some time, but then, when I suddenly saw her again, she would be closer than before. Bit by bit, she was edging closer. I wanted to get off that mountain before she caught up to me. I had to call someone, but my phone was out of range. Damn it! I tossed my phone into the back seat. I was beginning to lose it. Here and there, the road continued on ahead straight. During those times, she was definitely getting closer. Why? She was moving so slowly. I glanced in the rearview mirror again. She was so close, not even 5 meters behind the car. I could see her face. Weren't ghosts supposed to hide behind their hair? Don't show your face, you dumb fool! She walked towards me with an expressionless look on her face. The CD suddenly stopped. I frantically pressed all the buttons, but it remained silent, squeaking with each curve. Finally, I reached the ready-made concrete workshop. As I turned the gentle left curve and her white face appeared in my side mirror, I wasn't on the verge of tears. I was fully bawling. To my right-hand side was a deep cliff, so if I fell over, I'd die. Calm down. Thinking back on it now, maybe I snapped a little. Then, a stupid idea came to mind. Maybe I could only see her through the mirror. Maybe, if I turned around for real, she wouldn't be there. Maybe, if she was really there, maybe I wouldn't be able to see her. I slammed on the brakes and stopped the car. I flung myself around and looked out the rear window. The woman had her hands on the boot of the car, a faint smile rising on her face. And even though the car had stopped, now it was shaking side to side. I could clearly see her face under the dim streetlight in front of the concrete company. It was at this point that I realized people don't really scream "Uwa" or "Kya" when presented with such a sight. You often see people in manga go "Hee!" And that's the right answer. My shaking hands wouldn't do what I wanted them to, and I couldn't tear my eyes off the woman's face. My entire body trembled. At that very moment, my phone suddenly rang, and I jumped in surprise. And at that very same moment, the woman disappeared. I stared in amazement until the phone stopped ringing, and then I came back to my senses. I retrieved it from the back seat and checked the call history. It was from my aunt. I was close to the concrete workshop, so they had an antenna set up. I quickly called back. "Ah, you're still driving, are you? I'm sorry." I was so relieved to hear her voice. "No, I'm pulled over at the moment, so it's fine. What's up?" "You left something here." "What the heck is this?" "Some small blue thing." "If you don't need it today, then that's fine, but is this something you might need soon?" Seemed I'd dropped my USB stick from my pocket. It's for personal use, so it's fine," I said. "I'll pick it up next time I come over." I looked all around to confirm that the woman wasn't there before lighting a cigarette. I chatted with my aunt about this and that until I finally calmed down. Then I got back in the car and set off. I pressed the audio switch and sound came out as usual. I laughed before I could stop myself. I wasn't too far away from reaching town. Thoroughly cheered up, I screamed along to the blue hearts as I hurried back. As I passed through the last village before I reached the larger prefectural road, I suddenly realized my mirrors were twisted. I wouldn't be able to see behind me once I reached town, which would be dangerous. Putting it back to its normal position, something slowly appeared in it. No way. Why? She was sitting in the back seat. Her smile took up her entire face. I'd never seen such a creepy smile in my whole life. And smiling, she said, "You're gonna hit it." I was so preoccupied with the mirror that I wasn't looking ahead. I was just about to drive off a cliff. I couldn't move. Shit, I'm gonna die. At that moment, my phone rang again. Able to move, I slammed on the brakes and jerked the steering wheel. The brakes screeched, followed by the inevitable sound of the wheels and body scraping. The intersection leading to the prefectural road was just up ahead. "You should have gone over." I heard a faint voice and, nervously, turned around. The woman was standing a short distance behind the car, that blank look on her face again. She seemed to be somewhat angry. I didn't know whether she could hear me or not, but I screamed anyway. "Look at what you did, asshole! Don't follow me again, you fool!" The woman pivoted, staggered away, and then disappeared. There was a residential police box nearby. What I assumed to be the resident officer came running out of the house. Trying to calm my beating heart, I shivered and hurried onto the prefectural road. When I looked in the rearview mirror, there was nothing there. Just a few other cars going about their business. I bought some coffee from a nearby convenience store and then checked my call history. There was a call from my mother, so I rang her back. Sorry, but could you pick up some milk on your way back? Your father's such a hassle if there's no milk in the morning." "Sure. Thanks." "Huh?" I hung up without replying, then went back into the convenience store to get some milk. After that, I stopped crossing the mountains to visit my aunt. And when my mother asked her to come and live somewhere closer nearby, I strongly suggested that she should as well. Now, I can reach her house in 5 minutes by foot. The Japanese countryside is littered with tiny fishing villages, and many of these come with their own stories and legends. A group of friends go on a fishing trip in one such village, but while they're out on the water, they spot something in the distance that causes the captain to panic and take them back to shore. Turns out they've seen something they shouldn't have, and for good reason. Find out why in Kajiko. I love fishing. The ocean, mountains, and rivers. I enjoy them all and everywhere in between. But my real favourite is heading out into the open sea. That's my one true pleasure. And so, this is something that happened to me quite a while back. I was on the cusp of having several days off in a row, and I could barely sit still. For you see, I'd made plans to go on a fishing trip with several of my friends, and I was so excited that I could barely wait. We would spend most of our waking hours fishing. Then, we would enjoy the blessings of the sea with our drinks at night. I drooled just thinking about it, and even the mere thought was enough to make my heart dance. Work finally finished, and then it was the first day of our holidays. The weather was great, and myself and 2 friends jumped in the car, heading toward our lodgings. After we arrived, we jumped in the hot springs for a bit and then had dinner. Then we got everything ready so we could head out fishing first thing in the morning. I was excited about all the things I might catch as I lay down to sleep. When I woke up, it was still dark. Yet, when I looked at the clock, it was time to get up. Fishermen do start their days earlier, after all. We quickly got everything ready and then headed out before the sun rose. The boat captain who took us out on the water was someone we'd known for a long time. He was a veteran, full of both knowledge and experience in the area, and someone we could greatly rely on. We greeted him again, and then we set out for the open sea. The ocean at night is so magical. It's pitch black, and if you don't have a light, you can't even see the outline of your own body well. If the moon is out, then you can see a little, but all you can see is yourself in a vast expanse of darkness, so it's actually quite scary. The sky started to brighten as we started fishing, and we fished our hearts out. The captain was never off the mark when he recommended a good fishing spot. Then, after we'd caught a good amount of fish, I noticed a noise nearby. It sounded like something creaking, and I could hear it during the intervals between the waves crashing. Maybe it's the boat, I thought, but if so, then we should have heard it all along. What's that? One of my friends said at the sudden sound, confused. I am terribly sorry, but the tide has changed and we must finish for the day. My apologies, the captain suddenly said. He started steering the boat back to shore. Something didn't feel right, but the captain's word was final. We still had the following day, I thought, and we decided to spend the rest of the day sightseeing instead. Even after we returned to shore, I couldn't get that sound out of my mind. The fish had been biting well, so why did the captain make the decision to go back? Normally, he would stick it out and let us fish. I concluded that there had to be some secret behind that sound we heard. The next day, we set out again before the sun came up, and as we were moving, I asked the captain a question. What was that creaking sound yesterday? He looked troubled as he answered. That's a sign we need to go back. I wanted to question him further, but we reached our destination, so we started fishing instead. The waves were silent and the sea calm. And not just the sea. Time passed without a single bite. That sound started up again in the silence. I listened closer, trying to place where it was coming from, and in the distance, I noticed something. It looked like a small wooden boat, and someone was standing, moving what looked like a skull. Bit by bit, it appeared to be approaching us. "Captain, there's a boat out there with a skull," I said. "Are you sure?" he screamed. "How many people do you see rowing?" I saw one. My friend saw two, while my other friend said he didn't see anything at all. The moment the captain asked us, he started the boat so fast that we nearly stumbled over. "Sorry, this is going to be a little rough, but we have to hurry back now." His unusual panic made us nervous. I had no idea what was going on, but I could still hear that creaking noise mixed in with the sound of our boat engine. I turned around, fearful, and that wooden boat was slowly getting closer to us. There was no way a hand-rowed boat could catch us in a motorized one. I stared at it, wondering what on earth it really was. And then I saw it. A mummy was rowing the boat. It was nothing but skin and bones. It certainly didn't look alive, but still, it was rowing the boat towards us. "Captain! It's getting closer!" I screamed in terror before I could stop myself. The captain ignored me, his full focus on operating the boat. "What the hell is that?" my friend who could see it muttered. Soon we spotted the shore, and the boat following us slowly disappeared in the distance. "You mustn't stay in your lodgings today," the captain said as we landed, guiding us somewhere. "You must spend today at the shrine." When we got there, he spoke to someone who looked like a Shinto priest. "They have unfortunately seen a Kajiko." "I see," the priest replied. "I will take them in." And so, we were forced to spend the night at the shrine. They were very kind to us, and the captain even treated us to some fish, free of charge. Some people from our lodgings even came over to support us. We had just experienced something unexpected, yet their hospitality made us think little of it. "What is a Kajiko?" I asked after we finished dinner. And finally, they told us the truth. Long, long ago, well before the war, with the ocean spread out wide before them, fishing was the main occupation for those who lived in this area. Most people supported themselves out on the sea with other members of their family. Schools had not yet reached them at the time, so even young children went out on the boats with them, and they were a valuable part of the workforce. However, with the increase in fishing catches and the shortage of manpower, it became impossible to survive without labour from somewhere else. And those chosen were children who were sold due to hardships, or children who had nowhere else to go. It's hard for us to believe now, but even in Japan, there was a period of time where children served as a valuable part of the workforce, and they were often the victims of human trafficking, slavery, and forced labour. This was true not only for fishing, but also other jobs, such as farming, and although there's no official history of this, it was a nationwide practice. They called these children Kajiko because they predominantly worked the rudders, also known as kaji. Yet, the treatment of these children gradually got more and more inhumane, and people viewed them as nothing more than mere labour, working them from morning to night without break. If they tried to escape or rebel, they were punished so harshly that numerous children died. As you might expect, there were no official records of how many of these Kajiko were sacrificed, so the truth remained shrouded in darkness. Time passed, and at some point, stories started appearing of people who claimed to have seen the spirits of the Kajiko. The number of them on the boat varied from person to person, but the more you saw, the sooner you would die. In general, if you saw 4 or more Kajiko on a boat, then you would die for some reason or another within the week. People soon realized that seeing the Kajiko was also closely related to your position within society. For example, a company president with a large number of subordinates, a famous person, a village chief, or someone extremely wealthy was more likely to see a Kajiko and then die than someone of lower standing. One company president, who claimed to have seen more Kajiko than he could count, then fell off a cliff and died just a few days later. In recent years, this type of inhumane labor has mostly died out, and people saw less and less of the Kajiko, perhaps because they had finally moved on with the passage of time. For better or worse, we were regular, no-hoper, low-grade employees, so seeing the Kajiko would have little influence on us. But as a precautionary measure, just in case, it was decided that we should spend the night in the shrine anyway. I woke up during the night, needing to go to the toilet. The floor creaked beneath me as I walked, and remembering the sound the Kajiko's boat made, a chill ran down my spine. I wanted to finish my business as quickly as possible and get back to bed. As I tried to hurry matters up, I heard a sound. It sounded so close, yet so far away, but the sound was definitely there. No way. Was it a Kajiko? I couldn't move. I held my breath and waited to see what would happen next. Yet, the sound didn't stop. It continued with creepy regularity, on, and I panicked. What should I do? Should I spend the rest of the night waiting it out in the toilet? Or should I run for my life and wake the priest up for help? Had this Kajiko made a mistake and planned to drag little old unimportant me to the other side with it? Breaking out in a cold sweat, I made my decision. I would run from the toilet and seek help. Holding my breath, I moved carefully, trying to make as little noise as possible. I nervously opened the door to check the situation outside. I looked right, then I looked left. And there it was. A pale mummy, about the size of a child, stood in the hallway. There were large black holes where its eyes and mouth should have been, and although it was very much there, right in front of me, the scene was so unbelievable that I could barely believe my eyes. I tried to scream in fear, but not only did no sound come out, I couldn't move at all. I was frozen on the spot. Neither of us moved, and as I looked into those black holes where the eyes should have been, they seemed to get larger and larger, as though they were literally sucking me in. When I came back to, I was lying in bed. The priest was praying next to me, and when he realized I was awake, he sighed in relief. "Thank goodness you're okay." Nothing strange happened to us after that, and we were safely able to return home. Unfortunately, we weren't able to get any more fishing in, but that was to be expected after what happened. People have recently accepted the idea of black companies that exploit their workers. But I guess the problem of those who use and those who are used hasn't really changed much over the years. Even though it's not as tragic as the Kajiko, it's still heart-wrenching to know that the same kind of suffering still exists in the world today. I continued fishing in the sea after that, but the captain of that boat has since passed away, and the Kajiko have also mostly disappeared. I can only hope that the suffering they endured will continue to be passed on as a lesson to the rest of society for many generations to come. Our last story for this week once again takes us out into the countryside. A young woman learns that one of her high school friends has died, and another has gone missing. Or have they? As she starts to dig deeper into what's going on, she uncovers something far more terrifying going on. Find out what in Iengami. I debated whether I should post this or not, but it honestly doesn't make much sense to me. Plus, it was scary, so I'm gonna write it all down. A few days ago, an incident occurred where the dead Anko, alias, was actually alive, and Yoko, alias, who tried to help her, went missing. This isn't a supernatural story, and it's rather lengthy. There's no conclusion at the end either. This summer, I heard from some high school contacts that Anko had passed away. Anko, Yoko, and I were all in the same grade at high school. When I first entered high school, I was incredibly shy, and Yoko was the one who came over to chat with me. She was the first friend I made there. Yoko was always full of energy, bright, and had a strong sense of justice. She was the class mood maker. The town we lived in had previously been two villages that merged several years prior. It used to be A village and B village, and both of us were from B village. B village had been built in the land developed at the foot of the mountain that A village stood on. As soon as it was done, my parents moved there. As for Yoko, she moved into B village at the start of high school. When I was a kid, my parents often told me never to go to A village. When I started junior high school, lots of kids from A village became my classmates. But even then, my parents told me never to talk to them. And so, the kids from B village never spoke to the kids from A village. There were 4 kids in my class from A village. They had this dark aura around them, like they were kinda weird. But Yoko never once discriminated against them, and was the only kid from B village who would talk to them. Amongst those kids, she became especially good friends with Anko. And I, through Yoko, also started talking to Anko as well. But when we graduated high school, Anko moved to another prefecture. She didn't participate in our coming-of-age ceremony, nor our school reunion, so after graduation I never heard from her again. The ever-bright Yoko went on to university, but she ended up suffering from some type of mental illness. Nothing serious from what I heard, but we mostly lost contact as well. I graduated from a local university, and then I started work at a small store in B village. I finally got used to my job, and then, in the summer of this year, I received news that Anko had passed away. She was 24 years old. Losing a friend who was so young was a big shock. However, I debated whether or not I should go to her funeral. The friend who contacted me said that they weren't going to go. Their parents had also told them not to visit a village, of course. I tried to contact Yoko right away, but I couldn't reach her. After much debate, I decided I would go. Of course, I was the only person from B village who went. The place was full of strangers, and the only people I knew were my 4 classmates from school. Honestly, I regretted going. Several things struck me odd about the funeral. First was that the chief mourners had a different surname to Anko. There might have been a reason for that, but it didn't seem like they were her parents. Second was that there was no coffin or body. Normally at a funeral you have a coffin, the body of the deceased in it, and a portrait of the deceased as well. You light incense and face the coffin, but there was no coffin to begin with. Everyone turned towards the deceased's portrait and sang whilst holding their incense. Third and final was the sutras. There are all different types of sutras, and normally a monk is the person who recites them. But at Anko's funeral, almost everybody seated at the funeral sang some type of dark, gloomy song. The corners of their mouths seemed to force up against their will, so that they all appeared to be smiling. It was horrifying. Once I was done with the incense, I ran out of there as fast as I could. Several months later, when I had finally sorted everything out in my mind regarding Anko, I got a call from Yoko. "I've been waiting 3 hours for Anko to show up, but she's still not here." I had no idea what she was talking about. Anko was dead. "Anko is dead, you know. Did you mistake her for someone else?" I asked. "No, that was all a lie. She's actually alive," Yoko said. "I took her back to her parents' house to prove that she was still alive, but now she hasn't left the house since." Yoko explained to me what was going on. A few days earlier, she got a message from Anko and they met up. Anko had had absolutely no contact with her family, so she had returned home for the first time in a while. When she visited the town hall for an errand, she discovered that she was apparently dead, and she had no idea what to do. After discussing matters, Yoko tried to convince Anko to go see her mother. Anko didn't have the best relationship with her parents, but Yoko agreed to go there with her. Yoko stayed outside while Anko entered the house. After that, 3 hours passed and Yoko tried to go in herself, but there was some old guy keeping watch. Plus, the house was full of people, which scared her. Honestly, it didn't make a lot of sense to me, but at any rate, Anko was in trouble. I told Yoko that I'd be there in the hour, and after she told me where the house was, I hung up. I hurried to close the store and tried to let Yoko know that I was leaving at that very moment, but I couldn't reach her again. There was little else I could do, but on the way there, I got a call back from her. "Hey! Bzz! Zzz! Shut the gate! Zzz! Zzz!" I could hear several people screaming in the distance, but I couldn't hear Yoko's voice at all. I tried calling her back several times, but there was no response. 5 minutes later, I arrived at Anko's house. The sky was already dark. The area was empty with nothing much else around. There was a large wooden house on the right side of a massive yard, and on the left was a simple shed made of aluminium. Beyond that was another large building of some sort. There was a large gate in front of the house to the right, so I made my way towards it. At that moment, I saw a figure standing in front of the shed to the left. Looking closer, they appeared to be squatting on top of a large, round rock, and they were staring at the house. I couldn't find a doorbell on the gate, so I entered the yard and started walking towards the person on the rock. It was a rather big yard, covered in rocks, and they were noisy as I walked over them. Yet that person never once looked towards me, their eyes on the house the whole time. "Excuse me," I called out as I got closer, but there was no response. I turned in the same direction that person was looking, and suddenly I understood why Yoko had been so terrified. That person, they were looking at the outside corridor of the house. Dozens of people sat there in a row, Caesar style. Not a single one of them looked at me. All of them were focused on the person sitting in front of the shed. The corners of their lips lifted in a smile. I got goosebumps at the incredibly odd sight before me. When I finally came back to my senses, I was already on the way home, and somewhere in the distance I felt like I could hear that same song I heard at Anko's funeral. Yoko's car was never found. I tried calling both Yoko and Anko numerous times after that, but I never reached either of them. However, I eventually got an email from Anko that said, "I'm sorry you got involved in this," accompanied by a bunch of garbled text. That was the only contact I ever made with her. I tried to visit her house several times after that as well, but she was never there. There was no progress at all, and I was worried that she might have been involved in some kind of incident. Then, the other day, my father returned from the hospital. He had been hospitalized for a mental illness. It was then that I learnt of Yoko's situation. Apparently, she was in the same ward as him. In the psych ward, if a person harms themselves or others, they are moved to an isolated ward, and my father said that he met Yoko in that same isolated ward when he hurt himself. I was shocked. It was true that she was suffering from some type of mental illness, but it didn't affect her daily life, so why was she in the hospital? I asked my father how she was doing, but all he could tell me was that she was in no condition to be approached at all. Then, last night, I dreamt about Anko's funeral. The kids from A village who attended. Including Anko, there were only 4 of them. Yet, there had been 4 of them at the funeral. I searched my memories, and when I went to that funeral, there was a roll there for classmates from our high school to write their names on. I was the 5th name on that list, so there were definitely 4 other students from A village there. This bothered me so much that when I woke up, I resolved myself and called Ano, alias. I had never spoken to him on the phone before, but we were in the same class for 3 years. Plus, he had a crush on Yoko during that time. He was the only person I could ask about either of them. I tried calling him several times, but he didn't pick up. Finally, he called me back just before. "It's been a while," he said. I asked him straight up if he knew anything about Yoko and Anko, but he just apologized and wouldn't answer anything. I asked him about the 4 A village students who were at Anko's funeral and who that extra person was, but again, he wouldn't say anything. "I have to go now," he said, "and you shouldn't involve yourself in this any further. You just want to satisfy your curiosity, that's all. But please don't go near A village again. And no matter what happens, please smile." Smile? At what? And what does this have to do with Yoko and Anko? If you smile, then Iengami will disappear. It might take a while, but it'll disappear. Do you know what Iengami is? You must have seen it before. Look it up if you want. Ever since I was a kid, I'd heard rumors that A village sacrificed people in rituals. Maybe Anko was that sacrifice, and Yoko had somehow gotten wrapped up in the ritual as well. And that's what I think, anyway. The day after tomorrow, I think I'll go visit Anko's house again. A massive thank you and shout out to this week's Kami tier member, Jojo. It's thanks to your support, along with everyone else, that I'm able to keep doing this show. So thank you very much. Don't forget to check out the Kowabana merchandise store at kowabana.myteespring.co. And if you'd like to chat about this week's stories, come and join us in the Kowabana Discord. You can find that link in the description or on kowabana.net. You can also check out our Patreon at patreon.com/TaraADevlin for exclusive bonus stories and extras, or our YouTube channel at youtube.com/KowabanaJapan for all sorts of Japanese horror you won't find anywhere else. Thanks guys. Stay safe and I'll see you again next time for even more Kowabana, true Japanese scary stories from around the internet. Want even more scary stories? Head over to kowabana.net for new translations every week. You can also join our Patreon for exclusive stories you won't find anywhere else. Head over to kowabana.net now.